Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I've been looking forward to this as a long-standing Red Sox fan since about 2004. Okay, when he left us all at the altar. So thank you for getting up this morning and coming out. We're gonna talk about a number of things today. We're going to talk about baseball. We're going to talk about business, and we're going to talk about about redemption. We're going to talk about redemption. But first, let's talk about baseball. If you look back at your young life, probably 35 years of your life was playing baseball. When you talk about youth ball, Little League, Pony League, summer leagues, you spent about 5 minutes in the minor leagues, and then you played 22 years in the major leagues. And your statistics are really unbelievable, and the records you've set. But rather than kind of run through them, I spoke to Mark Teixeira this week, and Mark and you were teammates for 7 years, and Mark was no slouch. I mean, Mark had about 2,000 hits. He hit over 400 home runs. I think he had 3 MVPs, 5 Golden Gloves. He's the real thing. And what he said to me, Alex, was that you played a game unlike the game that he played and everybody else played. And there were only 2 people that he ever played with in all of his years that rose to a level that he thought was really beyond anything that he was capable of. And I'll tell you later who the other guy was. I can tell you were the only Yankee.
Okay.
And that's high praise from a teammate, isn't it?
It sure is, especially from a guy like Mark, who's my world championship mate and someone who went to Georgia Tech. Very, very smart investor, and also doing some great things post baseball.
Yeah. So does any part of you, as we sit here, it's 10:30 in Tampa right now. You might be going through your morning routine, getting ready to play the Twins tonight at 6:30. Does any part of you have that itch?
Well, I had a routine this morning.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite like when I played with the Yankees. Look, Mark, I'm always gonna miss playing. I love the game so much. I've been doing this since I was in Pampers, right? My father played baseball. It's the greatest game in the world. And to be able to wear the pinstripes and be one of 750 in Major League Baseball and one of 25. I remember my last year, I was 41 years old. I'm hitting third for the New York Yankees. It's about 15 minutes before the first pitch. And I sneak behind a mirror and I look at the Yankee uniform and I'm like, oh my God, I'm 41 and I'm still wearing a Yankee uniform. And somehow I'm still hitting third.
Right.
It was one of those moments of being truly grateful and appreciative for the moment.
Yeah. So what is it? Do you miss spring training? Do you miss the competition? Do you miss the smell of the grass, the camaraderie? What is it specifically that you miss?
I miss all those things, but what I miss most is I miss my 4 at-bats. I miss the competition. I miss hanging around and spending time with my teammates in the clubhouse, going out to eat. I miss mentoring the young players that come through our clubhouse. But what I miss most is the fans. And in New York, we have the greatest fans on the planet. And I'll be there next week because I'm still coaching some of our players.
Sure. So let's turn the clock back 25 years. It's 1993. Do you remember when you were at Westminster Christian School in Miami and Sports Illustrated called you the best high school player in the country? What did that feel like?
It was an interesting time because there was so much uncertainty, right? You're in this innocent climb, hoping to get a college scholarship, for one. I know my mother could never afford Stanford or the University of Miami were the 2 places that I wanted to go. And I just hoped that I didn't know that much about the draft. I just wanted to make sure that if I got a scholarship, I wanted to play football, quarterback, and shortstop.
How about when you got signed by the Mariners? As you started to talk about, you came from humble beginnings. Your dad left you when you were 10, your mom worked 2 jobs, and all of a sudden, you got this contract and you're making $1.3 million a year and $1 million signing bonus at 17. How did that feel?
It felt great. Yeah. First thing I did, I went and I bought my mother a house. And the second thing is I bought her a Mercedes-Benz. I remember it was a 190 Mercedes-Benz and it was gold, and I remember how happy she was.
As a 17-year-old?
As a 17-year-old.
Wow.
And I moved in with her. I stayed at the house, and I bought myself a Grand Cherokee. And it was probably the coolest thing I've ever, and I just remember thinking, like, if I do my job right, Mom, you'll never work again. And that's been true.
Yeah, that's great. But then you were 18, and you were starting on a Major League Baseball team. You were playing in the major leagues at 18 years old. What's your recollections of those days, and what was churning inside of you back then?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, I was a few months removed from my prom, and then I was playing,
Wow.
at Fenway. And I was facing Roger Clemens. And it just keeps getting worse and worse, right? And I had all my family up in the stands watching. And when you play in Fenway Park, day games, the background, the tarp is really, really small. So if you're a tall pitcher, and Roger Clemens was one, it basically comes out of the white shirts. So now we're nervous as hell. My knees are shaking where the catcher's like, are you okay? And I can't see the ball that's coming. And Roger throws a ball right at my nugget. And I swear, I don't even know how I got out of the way. And the next pitch, I grounded out to short. I felt it was a grand slam. I was so happy to get the hell out of there. And yeah, so it was pretty interesting.
Right. So from this young age, from 17, 18, probably a little earlier, basically your whole life has been played out in public. I mean, we all know a lot about you because we essentially watched you grow up, and we're still watching. It's a unique place, it's a unique place to be. What is when you're in that growth spurt, when you're in that incredible environment and you're young, you describe what was the first, what does that feel like?
I think, whether you're a young entrepreneur or a young athlete, the innocent climb is one that's very interesting, right? Because all you want to do is just rise to the top. And your whole day is consumed with your routine, what do I have to do? And I remember driving to the ballpark as a 19-year-old, and it was a little bit of visualizing, but it was actually more praying, because I kept getting demoted back to the minor leagues. And I would say, okay, dear God, if I can just put one ball in play, make all the plays defensively, sneak in a bunt or a walk, and sneak out a win, that's a great day. And those are your goals. And then you take those goals and you kind of just keep moving them forward. But what I've learned is at the very beginning, everyone says cash is king in business. It is. In sports and in business, is fundamentals that are king.
Yeah, so these kids come out of high school, they enter this vortex, they're paid like adults, they're asked to play like adults. Are we asking too much?
Look, I think it's a great, great opportunity. I think there's systems you can put in place that can help young players. Now being involved in the media side for over 3 years, one thing is I would suggest is any player that entering the big leagues or the NBA or NFL, do an entire year of internship as a media and do it for free. Get a full understanding. What is it that the media is looking for? What is their job? What is their responsibility? They're not really Darth Vader, right? And to be able to work with them and lean into them, understand those mechanics, I think would do players a lot of good.
Can you avoid mistakes at that age? You know, if you bat 300, you're a superstar. If you don't bat 1,000 in your personal life and those kinds of decisions you make, you can really get yourself into some trouble.
Yeah, look, for me, again, going from prom to Fenway Park, and then start this kind of innocent climb to where I wanted to go, I've had some great times and I've had some great lows. And for me, 2014 was the absolute dark point of my career, where I served the longest suspension in Major League Baseball history for PEDUs. And Mark, while I wanted that suspension to be half, say 50 or 75 games, it was 162. It was the entire season. And when I look back at it, it was a blessing in disguise for several reasons, because it allowed me to look in the mirror and take full responsibility for everything that I did. And then it gave me the opportunity to make 8 or 10 really, really tough calls to folks that had sponsored me, had mentored me, and believed in me. And it allowed me to turn the lens inward, to do some real work personally to figure out why does a guy that have pocket aces end up losing this hand. And then the toughest part, Mark, was having to come clean with my daughters and sitting down with them. I told their mother, Cynthia, that let's do that part like in 3 months. Well, of course, that took me almost 12 months to build the courage to speak to them. But once I got over that hump, I got myself healthy. I trained like a madman, and I came back. There was a poll that came out that less than 3% of the people thought I would even make the team. Well, of course, there's a pretty safe bet because 2 hip surgeries, 2 knee surgeries, I'm 40 years old, and hadn't played much baseball in a year and a half. And not only did I make the team, but hit 33 home runs and was able to help the team get back to the postseason.
You had a hell of a year, really a hell of a year. So with all of this that was going on, from the time you were a young man through all the ups, the downs, almost as if in a parallel universe, you were focused on your money and on business. I mean, that's not normal. I mean, that's not what a 17 or an 18-year-old does. Where did that motivation come from?
I think just watching my mother. My mother had 2 jobs. She was a secretary in the morning. She served tables at night. And I remember when she would come in at night, the Mets game would always be on. It would end around 10:30, 11. And she would come in. She was so tired from working double shift. And she had her little pouch where she kept her tip money. And I remember Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I would snap that, and then I would start counting. 22, 23, 24. Mom, great job. I'll give her a massage on her feet. And then by Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, it was 59, 60, 61, 62. I thought we were like Warren Buffett rich. I was so happy. And I got that from her. For whatever reason, at 14 years old, I thought, how does a kid from Miami, I grew up in a neighborhood called Kendall in Miami, how did a kid go from Miami to Palo Alto? And of course, Palo Alto is where Stanford is. And I realized then that, I know they've changed SAT scores, but at that time, I needed a 1200 in the SAT, I needed a 3.5, and I needed to be a good baseball player. And I knew the 1200 was going to be difficult with learning 2 languages at home. The math was good, so I started taking SAT classes. Of course, my mom couldn't afford them, but she gave me some extra cash, and I started doing that. And at the end of the day, I put myself in a position to be able to go to Stanford or go to pro, and ended up going pro.
Right. Well, you mentioned Warren Buffett. I actually talked to Warren this week about you, and what I've realized is that you've collected really the titans of business are a part of your kitchen cabinet, and Warren is one of them. And Warren describes you as someone who's got a money mind. He also said that to Vanity Fair, and he said that about you often. He says it just clicks for you. I also spent some time talking to Mark Lazary. Mark is a hedge fund billionaire who owns the Milwaukee Bucks. Mark has a different take. Mark's take is that you're just a student, that you're passionate, that you're studying, and that failure for you have a visceral quality where failure is just not an option. One says it's you were born with it. The other one says you're learning it. What do you think? Is it nature or nurture when it comes to your business interest and success?
Maybe it's a hybrid, right, of the two. I think I'm incredibly interested and inquisitive, and I'm hungry for information. I love to read everything. My favorite question is, I don't understand. Can you please explain it to me? Right? And I do that in our board meetings. I do that in our Monday morning meetings. And I think is important. You know, one of the other things that I think is super important is, as a young entrepreneur, is to really have a diverse board of advisors, right? And I mean diverse in age, in gender, in skills, in experience. And I think that's something that is so important, because as you move on in the real world and you're gonna have real life examples, you'll be able to kind of lean into this board of advisors that are not afraid to say no.
Let's talk about that. I know your chief of staff is a woman who comes from not a baseball background, not a sports background. She comes out of University of Miami, more in performing arts than anything else. Where do you find talent for your business, and what is the parallels that you seek and the parallels that you do not seek from athletes?
Yeah, you know, I always say that when I like to hire people, I like to hire people with a PhD, and not your conventional way from Harvard or Yale, although those are great too. I mean, folks that have a poor, hungry, and driven. And I think is the grit that will make a big difference. Is not just the big resume. And I like thinking outside the box. I like hiring great people that have grit and discipline. And then I like bringing them to my organization to do great things. And my chief of staff, Stephanie, is a great example of that. Yeah.
You know, business and investing, the ethos of business and investing, the emotion, the inherent conflict is fear on one end and greed on the other. I'm wondering what drives you.
You know, I'm a builder, and I like to build real estate. I like to build companies from the ground up. I like to build teams. I like to build a culture that, boy, in 2009, when we won that championship, every day you walked in, it felt like your junior year in high school. That was my best year. But it felt like my junior year in high school.
Baseball and football.
Baseball and football. We were lights out on both teams. And then all my guys graduated, and then they beat the crap out of me my senior year. They left me all alone. But walking into a room, when people walk into our office and they say, boy, I never want to leave this office, that to me means we're winning, right? Because you have to be happy, you have to be well coached, you have to have great fundamentals, you have to put team first. And I think that's what we try to create at A-Rod Corp.
Yeah. So let's talk about business.
Sure.
What are your holdings? What are you into? What are you looking at?
So A-Rod Corp essentially started over 15 years ago. It started with a small duplex, and we've grown that real estate company to over 12,000 apartment units in about 14 states, mainly in the Southeast. And it's fully integrated real estate company. And then in the middle column, we are into health and wellness, and really doubling and tripling down in the fitness space. And then on the third column is media and entertainment. And we like to invest our capital in businesses that, A, we understand it very well, that we're passionate, but that we can actually drive the needle quickly, and that our team can actually come in and work with the boards in a friendly way but in a firm way, to actually turn these things around.
Right. Well, that's a long way from baseball. Not the business of baseball, but certainly, the playing of baseball.
Mm-hmm.
When you're looking at businesses, so I would call, your real estate holdings as something that's that's a fundamental business.
Mm-hmm.
That's like business, which is different than your personal brand.
Mm-hmm.
When you're making decisions on where you invest both your capital and your time, how much of it is focused on business and how much of it is in extracting value for your personal brand?
Well, I think they have to go hand in hand. For us, it's really important that we believe in what we're selling or buying, right? If you bring me gas, oil, energy, we don't know much about it. We really can't bring much. That's a quick pass. And I do believe that a quick yes or a quick no is much better than a slow maybe. So we believe in that. But I'll give you one example, Mark. I was going down to Vegas an awful lot. Jennifer has a performance, and she has 40 shows per year. So I kept going down to Vegas. And all I need when I travel is two things. I need good food and a good gym, and I'm happy. Well, I was hitting 500. I had good food. And I kept going around these gyms, couldn't find anything that worked for me. So someone says, hey, try this place called True Fusion. So I walk into True Fusion, and the minute I walked in, it looked like Apple, Amazon, Google. It was so clean, so modern. And it's 5 rooms, all heated, and it goes from temperature from 85 to about 115 with about 85% humidity. And you can do yoga one day, Pilates, you can do TRX, and my favorite is kettlebells, which is kind of like a hybrid between Barry's Boot Camp and hot yoga. And with having 2 hip surgeries, I just can't do the treadmill every day because probably end up in a hospital. So I started doing some due diligence, and I wanted these in New York, Miami, and LA. Quickly found out they only had 3 in Vegas. So I approached the management team, and I said, would you be willing to grow this thing out? And they said yes. So in a short period of time, we ended up buying a big slug of this company. We took several seats on the board, and it's been 7 months. We've taken this from 10 to 140 gyms. We've sold part of China, and it's an explosive company that we're very excited about.
That's huge growth in a very short amount of time. Business is, you can do a lot of things in business. You can do well, you can make a lot of money. You can do good, which is you can give back. You can do both. Where do you come down?
We like to
a lot of people want to do well, and then they figure out how to do good.
Yeah. At A-Rock Corp, doing well is not part of our thing. It's one of the main parts. And I'll give you one example. I came up renting apartments, being a tenant. We never owned anything as a child. And I remember every 18 months or so, we would have to move to the next complex because the landlord would raise the rents. So that left a bad taste in my mouth. As an owner now, there's 2 ways to make money in real estate. You can raise the rents, or you can have better retention. We chose the latter, and how we've done that is, say we have 200 apartment units, we'll find a local nurse. We'll say, we'll give you apartment 14B for free. In trade, that your 199 neighbors can have your number, and if anything happens in the middle of the night, that one of the kids are sick, they can call you. That trade works out great. Then I go to the police and I say, Mr. Policeman, I want to give you, and maybe I do 2 with the policeman, I want to give you guys 2 free rooms, and everybody in the complex gets your number. One condition, you must park your police car right in the middle of the complex, okay? And especially the women at night, when they're coming home from their late night work, they can call you, you meet them up front, and you walk them to their door. And then thirdly, I find a teacher or 2, and I say, Miss Morales, I'll give you 15B for free. In trade, on the weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, you give me 5 hours each day of free tutoring, mentoring, SAT classes for my things.
Yeah,
And Mark, we don't raise the rent. What we found is we're giving better value than what they're paying, and what we find is our retention is better than everybody's.
Yeah. Retention ultimately becomes the game.
Yeah.
It's just a numbers game. Yeah, it's very interesting. So let's talk about Back in the Game a little bit. Back in the Game is a show that Alex is doing with CNBC, and the premise of the show is that you have athletes and artists who have done extremely well financially in their sport, but they certainly didn't have the attention to detail to their money that Alex has talked about. And Alex becomes really a mentor for them in a very practical and visceral sense. Our first episode premieres tomorrow night, and it focuses on Joe Smith. Joe Smith was the first draft pick, not unlike Alex, different sport, but also a first draft pick out of University of Maryland. He made $61 million in his NBA career, and he's down to almost nothing. And it's a personal finance show for people who have been at the top of the mountain and have fallen all the way to the bottom. What I want to do now is show you a clip. Not only does Alex engage with them in their own environment, but he has actually, in the case of Joe, brought him into his organization and used the tools of A-Rod Corp to help Joe take the next step in his life. So let's roll that clip, please. That's the end of this shameless self-promotion for the session. Something else Teixeira said, which I thought was fascinating, and I like Mark a lot. I've known him a while. Is that you were almost unapproachable on the field. When you were working, when you were in the cage, when you were getting ready for the game, you did not want to be bothered. But when you were in the clubhouse, you were loose. And the point he really stressed, which stayed with me, was that you always were accessible to the young players. Is this program, to some degree, an outgrowth of that?
It's really important to me. I mean, again, I entered the big leagues as a child, right? 17, 18 years old. And I'm at an age now at 42 that I've seen so many of my colleagues that are in a similar position, some worse, some better than Joe Smith. But when you think about Joe Smith, I know people out there are often thinking, how does this happen? And I'll just share a few numbers because I think they're very important. Unlike anybody in this room, you make about 90% of your income from age 20 to 30 as an athlete, okay? And then baseball, your average career is 5.5 years. Now, of the 750 players in Major League Baseball, less than 5% have a college degree. Now, I'm not a stockbroker, but with that information alone, I would short that stock, right? And then people say, well, but Alex, these guys make millions. Let's take 100 million, because that's a good number, and is a very, very rich number. If you play in LA or New York, 50% goes to Uncle Sam. Then you get 10% to the manager. You give 5% to your agent. You give 5% to your homies, okay? You're sitting here, you still haven't bought a house, you haven't bought a car, and you still haven't gotten divorced for the first time yet. So, it happens.
Yeah. So Joe's very interesting, and redemption is a part of what we want to talk about today. Joe's got two pieces of his redemption, and one you could argue is easier than the second, but they do go hand in hand. One is he needs redemption financially. I mean, he is at the bottom, and he also needs to be redeemed emotionally. Mm-hmm. He's been in a dark, in a very, very dark place. You've been in that place. Mm-hmm. You've had to punch your way out. Maybe you'll share with us what your lowest point was and how you use that to coach and mentor and teach others.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, in the middle of my suspension, which was by far the low point of my life, I remember watching the Yankee games that I couldn't play in and going to sleep, and in the middle of the night, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, just looking up at the ceiling and being in tears and saying really hating myself. How can I do this to myself? There's absolutely no need for me to be here right now. Again, I had pocket aces. And you just want to kind of beat yourself up and, but there is no shortcut, Mark. You have to, like I said, turn the lens inward and work just as hard there for me as I did in my baseball game. And the full-year suspension, that sabbatical, it was perfect timing for me because I needed to heal physically, mentally, and emotionally. And what was the most important thing in this whole lesson was taking full accountability for my mistakes. And when I did that, it empowered me and it started giving me hope. And it gave me, I felt liberated. And I think for anyone that's in Joe's position, hitting that point is the most important point, because if you don't, I just don't know when you can really turn around.
Yeah, the bottom. You got to get to the bottom.
And acknowledge the bottom.
Yeah, and acknowledge the bottom. Yeah. I want to encourage anyone who's interested in a question, and I can't see where the microphone is, but in the next few minutes, Alex would like to take some of your questions if you have them. Let's get back to business. Is there an end game for you in business? How do you know when you've arrived?
I mean, you've seen Buffett, right? We had the great fortune to go down to Omaha and celebrate, I believe it's 87th birthday. And it's a sport. Like, I just have too much fun. I go from one clubhouse wearing my pinstripe uniform to wearing a suit and going to the office and going to my other clubhouse. And it's fun. You love to see young entrepreneurs, love to teach them, love to see them grow. Look, one of the things I'm most proud of in my company is that women have a big, big leadership role in my company. Mention my chief of staff, my CFO, my managing director. And they got those jobs not because they were women, but because they were the best people for the job. And I also have people that in our shop that went to Harvard, Yale, Stanford, but I also have people that do not have a college degree. But talent is talent, and so is character.
So if I think someone was going to applaud, and that's worth applause, but so if baseball is your first act and business is your second act, is there a mashup in the future? Is the third act maybe owning a team? Being the general manager of a team?
No to general manager, or to manager, or to be back in uniform. No, for a long time I thought team ownership would be pretty compelling, but I sit in a position with ESPN and with Fox that, look, I'm a competitive guy. I love baseball. When I grew up, baseball was number one. I think we have the leadership in place with Rob Manfred and Tony Petitti that we can, eat away a little bit. I think the NFL has left us a little bit of an opening, and I think we can take some of that market share. But I am excited. Ultimately, I want baseball to win, and hopefully, I can be an advocate for that.
Well, in terms of baseball winning, do you think? And then we're going to. This will be my last question for at least a few minutes, and then we'll take any questions that folks have here. Do you think baseball could borrow some things from what Adam Silver's done with the NBA to contemporize the sport?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, it's Adam Silver, but it goes back to David Stern. David Stern, who did a fantastic job for over 30 years. First of all, what they've done leaning into social media, how they've engaged with their players. Look, they're also very lucky that they have some dynamic, incredible players, right? But they also have been in China for decades. They have over 100 employees in the ground right now in China, working full time. I think we can do a lot of those things, social media and all of that. But I also think you take a company like esports. Esports is the future. Esports is gaming that is made by millennials for millennials. And if you think about our game, that our average fan is a 58-year-old white male, right? that's not a good sign for us. But
Not that there's anything wrong with it.
not that
There.
we like,
You want those guys.
We
those-
like you guys,
Those
Mark.
older guys. Yeah.
but I think the perfect merger would be Yankees have one of the greatest brands in the world. Well, why couldn't they be an esports Yankees where you go to Yankee Stadium in the Bronx and you have Super Saturdays and Super Sundays where we would play from 12 to 4 and then from 4 to midnight you have esports around the world and you get to complement each other. And I think these are the kind of things that you have to think about. Look, if you owned a shopping center, REIT, and you hear 10 years ago that there's a company called Amazon that's coming around the corner, it's probably a good time to exit your shopping centers, right? And I think baseball has to think 20 years, 10 years ahead of time. And when you watch our games, we need to stop with the stats on base percentage, and it looks like you're doing an economics test. What you need to do is you need to put up what's the social media handle, what are the last 2 or 3 posts, what college did they go to, what kind of music do you like. You need to be able to engage, because my daughters, you're not gonna beat, the phone's always gonna win. But if I see someone interesting up there, or my daughter sees someone interesting, and they can put their phone and match it and go right into social media and get some information, I think that's where we get more engagement.
Okay, lights are in my eyes, so I can't see where the mic is. Right there, I see a hand. Please, go ahead.
Hey, Alex, also born in Miami, Back Club USA, familiar name for you. Curious to you, after your baseball career, what was it like to get back on the grind? Like, you know, when you're trying to make it to the majors, you're hustling hard every single day, but starting a business or starting your own business empire, what was it like for you to kind of get back in the weeds, dirty, hands always in the middle of it every single day again?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think part of it is I started this in my early 20s, very quietly. And now we've grown our company to over 600 people that work for us, kind of all over the place, right? But as far as rolling up your sleeves, I always think that as a leader, you can never ask any one of your teammates to do something you wouldn't be willing to do. And I always say that as a leader, if I need to go down to the basement and clean toilets, that's exactly what I'll do. And I think those kind of leaders are the ones that people follow the most. So it has been a grind, but not really, because I enjoy every moment of it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
What is the greatest business lesson you learned while playing baseball? Perhaps it was an experience you went through that allowed you, that you've been able to apply now as a pure businessman.
Yeah. So in the year 2014, while I was serving my suspension, I was at a function in New York City, and I ran into Robert Kraft. And Robert Kraft saw all the things that were going on in the press, and needless to say, was very disappointed, as was I. And he said to me, Alex, you have to start building bridges, not burning bridges. And it was very simple, and I went home that night and I wrote it down. And it's something that I've been thinking a lot ever since. I ran into Robert a few months ago and I told him that, and he just smiled and he was happy.
Thank you.
First of all, Alex, I grew up in New York, born and raised in Manhattan, and I'm 23 years old. Watching you and Derek and Mariano and Jorge growing up, it was one of the great blessings of my life. So I guess kind of building off that, you guys, you were big deals, you and Derek especially, and Mariano. How do you find that dynamic working with other people who are big, big players in the space, have big egos, big, large amounts of pride, and how do you find that dynamic and work well with other people like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, sometimes it could be challenging, and that's the beauty, right? You have a Major League Baseball clubhouse, you have 25 players, everyone's doing really well financially. In your 20s, you think that you've never made a mistake in your life, and you never will, right? But ultimately, it's about winning. And it's about the name in the front of your jersey, not the name in the back of your jersey. and to think about what do you have to do to make the team better. And you know, what I've seen in sports and in business is the innocent climb is different. But when you have the 80-20 rule, what you find is once you win the championship and you get a little bit of a fat belly, you get content. You have people that do 20% of the work that want 80% of the credit. And when you're in a winning culture, you want the opposite, right? You have people that do 80% of the work that want 20% of the credit. Now that's kind of a magic trick, and if you can land that, you have a championship culture.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Hey, Alex, thanks for coming. You have clearly been a mentor to so many people over your career, you know, whether it be in baseball, business, whatever it might be. And you've talked a lot about, you know, how probably scary that was as an 18 or 19-year-old coming up and just trying to figure it out. So I'm just curious, number one, you know, how important is it that you find a mentor that early? And number two, if you wouldn't mind sharing, you know, who do you think your biggest influence was that early in your career and maybe throughout your career as well?
Yeah, so I kind of divide them into buckets, right? I talk about having kind of a board of advisors, and they all can't look like Warren Buffett, right? Or they all can't look like my mother. You have to have people, first of all, that feel very comfortable saying no. I recently brought in a very talented young man by the name of Jeff to be our COO. I knew we were in trouble when he knows nothing about sports. And he says, we were in Boston, we were at MIT doing something with Obama, and he says, hey, the Boston Celtics are playing tomorrow. I said, no, Jeff, it's the Boston Celtics. Oh yeah, but you know. And then 2 days later, he says, oh, I can't wait because your first game for ESPN is going to be an opener. Sunday Night Baseball is the Anaheim Dodgers. Oh, no. I said, Jeff, you grew up in Anaheim. Is the LA Dodgers. He goes, right. So he writes it down on his computer. So having, and the reason why I say that is it's not just baseball or, right? You have to have diverse, and I mean it, right? Gender, age, all of it. The earlier the better, you know, find people that you respect, that have done it for a long time, that have a moral compass, that in a tough time, you have one call or two, you know who to call. I've called Warren Buffett many times. He actually helped me negotiate my last deal when I didn't have an agent, and boy, it was nice to have that call, right? But what you'll find is people as they get older, they love to mentor, it's free, and pick good mentors.
Thanks, Alex.
Hi, Alex. I'm Rachel. I grew up right outside of New York, and I went to Yankee games growing up from the time I was 3, like regularly. So seeing
Hi, Rachel.
It's very nice. Thank you. I wanted to ask. I know you did a lot of work with like the Boys and Girls Club and a lot of charitable things. So I just wanted to ask like what you're currently doing with kids and describe your experience working with kids and like what you've got out of that.
Yeah, so I've been a beneficiary of great programs. I say that if I didn't have the Boys and Girls Club while my mother worked 2 jobs, I wouldn't be here today. Recently, we just got involved co-chairing a Project Destined, which is ultimately a program where we go into inner cities and get kids that come from the wrong zip code. We call it Fighting the Zip Code War. And we give them financial boot camps. And last week, we were in New York. We brought in 60 young men and women from the Bronx. We taught a financial boot camp the entire week. We partnered up with Harvard Business School. One of the professors from Harvard came to teach. I taught. And then ultimately, we end up buying properties, myself and Cedric, my partner. And 20% of those proceeds end up going back to the students and paying for their college education. And the only way they continue to get that money is that they continue to do the boot camp online. So that's one that we're very excited about.
Great, thank you.
I've got a question about leadership styles. So A-Rod Corp, and you've spoken a lot about the importance of collaboration and the kind of servant leader model. Whereas in sport, maybe up until recently, it's much more of a top-down, I'm the manager, do as I say. So have you taken lessons in baseball that you've taken into your leadership style and your business style, or on the other hand, do you think sports could learn from that more collaborative approach rather than I'm your coach, do?
Well, I think you can learn from each other. I mean, I'm fascinated by how much intersections you have between business and sports. At the end of the day, no one really works for me and my company. We work for each other. We're teammates, right? That's the way sports works. We're in it together. We're aligned. I am a believer that if we win a championship, everybody drinks champagne. I don't think there's a need for the C-levels to drink champagne, and then the guys that are helping you with your bats and your cleats are drinking, Coors Light. They may not drink as much champagne, but they're going to taste the same champagne. And again, in leadership is about taking the lead, right? And they have to know ultimately that you have their best interests at heart. And if you do that, you can actually push them very hard. I think transparency is something that's very important. I've often said, I go to these board meetings, the first 90 minutes, people are just, BSing each other on how wonderful things are. And then hopefully by the second hour, you're getting into real business.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a couple minutes left.
Hi, Alex. Big baseball fan. Actually just got back from spring training and saw the Yankees playing down in Tampa. Fantastic experience. I want to ask you a question. Do you believe the Hall of Fame should tell the story of baseball, or it should be an icon to the highlights of baseball?
Explain that to me again.
Given the PED issues of your past and other players' past, there's been questions whether or not Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, and yourself will actually get into the Hall of Fame, even though your numbers are fantastic. And the question is, Buster Olney often talks about it on Baseball Tonight, what should be the role of the Hall of Fame? Should it be there to tell the history of baseball, or should it be there as like a mausoleum to the highlights of baseball?
Boy, that's a good one.
I think you could maybe just from your perspective address the question of the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. So look, first of all, I'd like to say that anyone who sits in my seat and tells you, oh, they don't want to be in the Hall of Fame, they're liars. I would love to be in the Hall of Fame. Any player that has put a uniform on would love to be in the Hall of Fame. I understand my past, and I own my past. So I've done my best already, right? And what I can tell you is that what I can control is I can be a Hall of Fame father, I can be a Hall of Fame son, I can be a Hall of Fame businessman, friend, partner. And those things I'm going to take a lot of pride in.
Thank you for answering that tough question. You're a really
Thank
nice
you.
guy.
Got it.
You know what? I'm going to use the prerogative of the moderator to I think that puts a really special button on the conversation. I want to thank Alex very much. I want to encourage you to watch Back in the Game tomorrow night. But I really want to thank you all for being here. Have a great time at South by Southwest.
Thank you.